significant discrepancies in a few items, and we have started taking action to respond to that. We took action before they showed up, even because, frankly, I was new a year ago and learning, so I had a lot of questions myself. Sure. And some of our other staff is new. So a lot of people that maybe who in the past were assuming things were going on, we asked questions and found out a lot of different things. But certainly the audit was helpful in that regard. We've brought lawsuits against some of the people that she mentioned, for example. One of the problems is, as I mentioned, most of our property is underwater. Well, some of these leases, for example, the one where we hadn't collected rent in a number of years was underwater, but it was filled a long time ago. It's probably filled by the railroad. There are some issues of who owns it, title-wise. The state may have actually put out deeds or what we call patents back in the 1800s. They may have violated the Constitution in doing that. And so those things will come up and have to be resolved as part of those actions. So one of the things she mentioned was that there was a $1.2 million, in the numbers she was looking at, loss of revenues. We believe that right now we've accounted for all but returning about $200,000 of that. So there still is money out there that we need to go after. One of our problems also is as a landlord in going after tenants who are in arrears is the cost of litigation. We certainly try and negotiate with our tenants to try and help them. With the economy being it is what now, we have a number of them who've asked for rent reductions or other ways so that they don't go out of business, and we're certainly looking at all those to keep those options open.
And the rent reduction component is an interesting, because I'm sure you're being flooded with that. But is it truly just a staffing issue which has created most of the problems that you've had? I mean, if the legislature said tomorrow we're going to give you 10 additional staff.
Ask him how large staff.
Well,
I have to apologize for bringing this other chart late. I thought that we had it, but we didn't. So it sets forth our staffing.
How big is your staff now?
It's about a little over 200,
okay,
or right around 200. It was about 250 20 years ago. It sounds like we lost 50, but in fact what's happened is we've gained over 100 positions in the oil spill prevention program, and we've lost 160 in the revenue generating program. Excuse me, 180, almost 179.
So you lost 180 in the revenue generation category, but
That's right.
You put a lot of
and also
you gained 150
enforcement.
in the enforcement, the oil spill.
Well, the oil spill prevention. Making sure that there are, and also for invasive species, ballast water program, trying to keep. I'm sure you hear in the news often the fact that we have invasive species coming into California by the vessels coming from all over the world. We have a few staff who are involved in that, as well as we have one person dealing with hull, things that come on the hulls of ships. And so we've got a very wide different types of staff that is involved in this. We have surveyors. We have one appraiser for our 4.5 million acres. We do have some management staff who have deep experience in appraising, but we only have one dedicated person at this point.
Senator Ruby, I wanted to ask something in there, or you want to let him finish on this topic?
You can finish on this.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so, and I know you've only been there since 2010, so it's...
Well, I've been there since 1977.
Well, it's general counsel,
not
in this position. So, so from a staffing standpoint, I mean, because again, that seemed to be the one appraiser, for instance, is shocking. And how many did you have?
I think we've had as many as 7 at one time, if you go back far enough
not to the 1800s.
We've had 5 or 7 foresters. We have none now.
Okay.
So starting in 1991, which is when we were given this new program, we also saw significant cuts by several of the prior administrations, and when you lose 74% of your funding for both, it's not just revenue generation. This staff that does revenue generation is also responsible for making sure people aren't trespassing on state property, or that we're dealing with remnants in the delta of old piers or old oil facilities on the beaches in Santa Barbara that need to be rectified. And we just got from the city of Goleta an honor for our staff having implemented a program that's helping clean up the beaches there for safety on oil operations that were put in there before the state even had an oil program. So there's
Okay,
a lot of these remnants that we have to deal with.
But I just want to have a clear picture on this, though, because, again, obviously your contribution to the state general fund, is important. And, whatever would make your operation work better, I think is important to note, for us. So two questions. One, is on the revenue and collection aspect. So how many people are there now? And that you said you lost 100. And
I don't know if the form you have is the same as I do. If it has at the top of the page the different breakdowns.
Yes.
Okay, so in the general fund category, we have 63.2 positions supported by the general fund.
Okay.
Out of the 210 positions, so
Okay.
about 29% of our staff's supported by the general fund, and we get about $9 million of general fund money back from the approximately $400 million that go to the general fund. So, you talked about incentivizing. I don't want to say we're interested in that because I don't really think that's appropriate given the fluctuations in values. We wouldn't want to tie it to any particular percentage. But we do think it's important for all the decision makers, whether the legislature or administration, to look carefully at the potential for the state to generate increased revenues. We're looking at these 400,000 acres we have that are primarily out in the desert. Right now, we're involved in the largest geothermal electrical generation in the world at the geysers. The geysers actually produces enough electricity for all of San Francisco. The commission brings in millions of dollars in that lease. Those are school lands. The income goes to the state teachers' retirement system, makes up the difference so the general fund doesn't have to backfill that. We have the largest potential geothermal field in the world at the Salton Sea. We have a couple of applications and leases down there. Solar out in the desert with our hundreds of thousands of acres. Fortunately, a bill was passed this last year, AB 982, I believe it was, by Assemblywoman Skinner, and that bill directs the staff to enter into a MOA with the Bureau of Land Management to try and exchange land so we can facilitate both the development of solar sites as well as transmission corridors, and then wind. We have wind applications and waves. So looking at the 33% renewable energy goal that we have only 9 years away, we think the commission can play a big role in that. We have one person dealing with on our staff assigned to all our school lands. So when you ask about our, as the state auditor acknowledged, we have had significant reduction in staff dealing with these types of issues, and we definitely believe that additional staff is necessary to not only generate revenue but to fulfill some of these other obligations we have. And we have asked the administration for additional help in that regard, and so we're optimistic that will help, that will be coming.
Senator Rubio.
I appreciate you bringing up and segueing off the revenue interest that you may have. Going back to your statement about requiring environmental impact reports on the oil industry and looking at the numbers that have come in just over the last 4 years, the Wall Street Journal recently had a piece where states throughout the union have seen robust recovery and exploration on oil and natural gas. As you know, the state has a huge resource with respect to natural gas, and but less so with the crude. But particularly in the Long Beach area, where you've got sharing revenue agreements with the city of Long Beach and others, why have, at a time where we needed increase in revenue, and other states are experiencing significant increases in revenue, the cost per barrel has remained relatively high? Why did we significantly lose or drop in the last 4 years, where you talk about a $4 million, for a $4 million lease on a solar project, you would be good to tell me, but you're talking about thousands of acres, versus when you utilize land, you talk about $4 million. Just from 07, 08 to 08, 09, in looking at two different categories, we lost $100 million in the downturn. Was that directly correlated to the new requirement of an EIR, or what interim process or program did you put in place until the EIRs were completed? And then secondly, what are we doing to work with local governments like the City of Long Beach, particularly the Mayor, Bob Foster, who's a great, great friend, and I know you're working with right now on an issue, and also the oil industry so that we can, at least in the most immediate, generate as much revenue as we possibly can? And how closely are you working with the Department of Oil and Gas?
Well, I'm glad you asked those questions, Senator Rubio, because they are very important. The column that you identified, I believe, for mineral royalties probably includes primarily gas in the Delta and possibly some of the Santa Barbara, Ventura oil leases we have. And some of those operations probably have been shut in recent years, but we're certainly trying to increase those. And mineral royalties may include, those mineral royalties are hard rock minerals in that particular column. If you're looking at the one that's identified as mineral royalty 6217.
No, I'm looking at PRC 6217 and then PRC 6217, one under Long Beach, the other under state sovereign lands.
Well, under Long Beach, we actually increased by $77 million from the prior year, the net profits for the state.
But we dropped off $70 million between 07-08, and then we had a lull for those 2 years. And I'm trying to explain why that significant lull. I like the fact that we went back up, but
I think primarily it is a declining field. It's been declining somewhat since the 1970s. However, the price of oil is the main factor there, and I think I mentioned earlier that 10 years ago, a barrel of oil was selling in Wilmington for $11.65, and today it's, I think, $103. And that goes up and down periodically. So just a few years ago, it was back down in the 60s, I believe, or maybe even lower, $40
so you would say
a
that
barrel.
lull was attributed to the gas.
Absolutely. It's price sensitive. But I would like to mention that because you brought up both Long Beach and some of our other areas where we're trying to incentivize additional production. In the Huntington Beach oil field a few years ago, we negotiated with the oil company to do because the prices were so low that they were losing money, they were ready to shut them in. We thought there was a potential in the future, if they could keep these wells operating, for the oil to come back and the state to benefit from those revenues. And so we entered into what's called a sliding scale royalty, whereas when the price of oil is very low, the state takes very little because they need that for their operation to keep it maintained. But when the price goes up, so does our value. So historically, most royalty interest owners would get about 16% of the royalty rate. We lowered that, I believe, to something like 10% when the price was very low and up to 25% when it was higher. And that's been very lucrative to the state by renegotiating that, and it also helped the oil companies continue to operate. In the Long Beach field 20 years ago, a new deal was struck. Interestingly, in Long Beach, when the state put that up for auction decades ago, we got a bid of 95% of net profits to the state as part of that, which is kind of unheard of, but it was a net profits agreement. It was ARCO that bid on that at the time, I believe. Mm-hmm. And ARCO has assigned out their interest to Occidental Petroleum. Mm-hmm. Part of the Long Beach unit was renegotiated 20 years ago and dropped that 95% net profits down to 40-some% for the state and a small percentage for the city, and then the rest of it goes to Occidental. But the incentive was that they would invest hundreds of millions of dollars in new technology to go and search for more oil. About 90%, over 90% of what's produced from those wells is water. And so you have to take the water out, and it's re-injected. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Department of Conservation or DOGGR. One of the problems that Long Beach has been facing in recent couple years is the fact that they want to be producing more oils at such a high rate they could make a lot more money, but they haven't had the ability to get their permits issued for either developing more oil or injecting. And that's been hampered to some degree, and we all hear about the concerns across the country about fracking and the impact that can have on water quality issues and the environment. I think one of the things about the Long Beach field is that I think virtually all the operation is at least a half a mile below the surface, and there are no water. There is no aquifer being used by local citizens in that area, so basically they are pumping back in water that's being developed from there, but they'd like to do additional ones. I received a letter from the city indicating that they thought state had actually lost $20 million because of the inability to develop these wells this year. My staff, I asked them if they thought that was accurate, and they indicated that it could be in excess of $10 million. So,
just for the city?
For the state.
Oh, for the state.
Yeah, for the general fund. I don't know the accuracy of those numbers, but, and they may be speculative based upon how much they actually would have been able to, whether those wells would have been productive or not and everything else. But there has been a backlog. I understand the Department of Oil and Gas has gotten a number of positions. I don't know if it was 80-some positions, but a significant number of positions to help try and push those permits through, and so we're optimistic that that's going to take place. I haven't been personally involved in that, but I've gotten that information from the city and from our staff on that.
So has anyone ever asked you, because it is a big issue with the Department of Oil and Gas, or commonly known as DOGGR, has anyone ever requested for you, with all of the different categories that you have here, if you can clearly indicate the amount of permits that are pending, and then on a rough estimate determine, say, on average, an X number percentage of those would produce some sort of finding in oil, given the technology that we have, what the state has lost out given the high number of pending permits that are awaiting review?
Well, one of the problems and one of the reasons we probably lost some of our staff was this statute that was enacted in 1991 that set up what they call the optimized water flood program in the Long Beach unit. And at that time, the commission staff was monitoring very closely what was going on in the Long Beach operations. That statute provided that basically it was taken over by the city of Long Beach. And so they are much more in tune, and they're the ones who approve the wells and so forth. The commission's role has been limited to just a couple, other than trying to make sure we are not being shortchanged on the revenues and dealing with safety issues, is one of simply the commission's role continues to be one of monitoring the value of the oil and making sure the production is such that the state's getting its revenues, but the actual drilling approvals are given by the city of or direction is given by the city to Occidental Petroleum, who runs the field. It's not a lease in that instance; it's a contract, and it's a little bit different. So the city actually owns the oil under a legislative grant from the legislature from 1911, but the legislature's amended that grant on a number of occasions, and that's why the state shares in the royalty. We have 85 different local governments that operate some of the state's sovereign lands on its behalf. And clearly this is one where the state shares in some of the revenues. It's kind of a unique situation in that regard, although the legislature did just pass a bill this year, and the governor signed amending the Pittsburgh grant, which will allow for sharing of revenues as well for the state on these lands that are operated by local governments.
Mr. Fossum, I'm a bit confused. You just stated that the city of Long Beach, in other words, is the lead agency issuing the permits to allow industry. I thought it was
they direct this. Occidental Petroleum will bring to them a program, a plan, and say this is what we'd like to do, and the city will say we want you to do this because the city manages the lands on behalf of the state. The commission's role: we do look at the annual plan and a 5-year plan as to what they intend to spend. The commission does look at that. And in fact, this last year, the lieutenant governor asked us to look more carefully at that and to be able to explain in more detail, and particularly as to safety issues. We had not done a safety audit on those islands down in Long Beach named after the astronauts. And so that's one thing we're going to be starting in January or end of December to do a safety audit that will probably take a year, and it will take a number of our staff to do that. So that's one of the elements that we're involved in Long Beach, but it's not on a day-to-day
Sure. So if Long Beach approves the plan, but industry has to go to the Department of Oil and Gas to get the permit to actually both drill for oil and then re-inject the water that you stated is 90% brought up, and there's some small gas sometimes. And your charge with the land commission is to ensure that the state is bringing in the revenue that it should. I'm asking, have you been alerted to the difficulty and the slowdown of the issuance of permits or reviews of permits by the Department of Gas, oil and gas? And if you have, at what point do you become engaged to say, time out, the state's not receiving the revenue it otherwise would if your sister agency, to call it as such, would expedite and review permits, not approve them, but to review them and make some final determination pursuant the plan of Long Beach? Am I making any sense here?
Yeah, and you know, I'm sensitive to that, and I have been told that there has been discussions within the administration on that, and that there has been progress being made. So I would be optimistic. I'm afraid I'm not personally that knowledgeable about, you know, either what the Department of Oil and Gas concerns are, or about you know, what leverage we could have as far as trying to expedite that. But I understand that there has been discussions, and that certainly, given the fact that they've had additional staff, I would think would help move those that permitting process along. And I understand it's not just Long Beach by any. Kern County is certainly sensitive to that too, I'm sure. You know, I would like to mention that not everything we do is processed just a simple permit. In Kern County, a few years ago, Elk Hills, actually, this goes back to probably the Harding administration and the Teapot Dome scandal and everything else. The state, since the 1920s, was trying to argue that we own some of these mineral rights in a school lands parcel there. The United States took them back, saying they were mineral in character, and so the act from Congress didn't pass those lands to the state of California. We fought it, kept losing and losing. At a political level, we went to Congress a few decades ago and finally convinced them to give us a share of the proceeds. And the Mineral Management Service finally sold off those lands. I don't know if it was to Chevron, but somebody like that. The state's share was over $300 million that we received to put into STRS at that time on something where we lost time and time again in court, but were able to politically go to Congress and lobby on behalf of the state to get some of that revenue back. And it was a small percentage of what that entire settlement was. But so it's not a simple, you know, dealing with a. It's so complex what the agency does, from dealing with mom and pop marinas in the Delta to major oil companies dealing offshore.
Right.
And it's a variety, and with a very small staff, we are stretched. And so, but I think we have a very dedicated, hardworking, professional staff, and would take the challenge.
As someone who worked really hard on the oil spill prevention front with Assemblymember Huffman, congratulations on. I know that was very important for your department, Mr. Chairman. If the commission could do so, I think this perhaps is one of the single greatest areas where we are missing out potentially on significant revenue. You have one agency or department that has not only confronted capacity issues from a staffing perspective, but second, much like the Land Commission on Lands did, has changed its view or interpreted regulations differently, or found that oil industry should have been doing perhaps environmental documents that they historically never did. So there is many conversations, as you alluded to earlier. I happen to be in many of those. There's somewhat of a consensus on what should be done moving forward. The question then becomes, between the time that a full environmental impact report can be completed and today, those take somewhere 8 to 12, 14 months at a time. What does the state do? And while we are wrestling and that dilemma as to what we do in the interim, it is my hunch that if an assessment is done, you did a cursory one just in Long Beach. The city of Long Beach says we lost out $20 million from year to year. That the state is losing out on a tremendous amount of revenue. Kern County, for instance, he alluded to it just a second ago, has lost anywhere between $8 and $10 million in just property tax revenue locally because of the slowdown in the issuance of permits within this one department. So it's very intriguing to talk about state-owned lands, minerals, etc., and how all of this is a process that needs to work together, and how we manage it is really key. So when we look at lost revenue, I would venture to guess, and while Department of Oil and Gas has their argument, the state at a time when it's desperately needing revenue is leaving revenue on the table.
And I'll echo that. I think that's my concern, is that maybe, again, when you look at the numbers you presented in terms of your staff, I think we're leaving, in my opinion, we're leaving money on the table across the board. And while the legislature is struggling to figure out how ways to fill holes and what to do on from a revenue standpoint, there is the cost of doing business is always an issue in California, and the delays, and so I would echo your comments that if you've one appraiser, then common sense says you're going to lose money. If you have a limited staff on the EIR or the assessment side of some of the oil projects, you're losing money. And I guess that's why, my original question was kind of, isn't it just kind of common sense? It says from a cost-benefit analysis aspect, you should put more focus on this entity because the ROI, the return on investment, is significant. But maybe I'm missing something.
Well, it's interesting to note that the Commission has not been treated as a revenue-generating agency, even though we've brought in these hundreds of millions of dollars each year. And so when prior administrations have had across-the-board cuts for non-revenue-generating agencies, we take those cuts. And I think part of the concern, and I want to say again, you mentioned earlier about independent agencies, and I think that's one of the real strengths of the Commission, is having 2 elected officials plus the Director of Finance on it. But at the same time, what we've had in the last number of years, in fact, probably more like 40 years, is almost every year, with some minor exceptions, we've had a administration that is of a different party than the majority of the Commission. It's just the way it worked out. We've had, and so there's been kind of a disincentive for the Commission to be, it's not directly under the administration. We have the Director of Finance, but we have political commissioners who may have may be pushing a certain agenda that isn't in line with the administration. And so I think we've seen some significant cuts in the past because of positions the Commission has taken on
Sure,
things.
but that's the detriment of the residents of the state of California. The money is not Republican or Democrat or independent or green or libertarian.
Neither is the staff.
Revenue is revenue.
And I don't want to over-characterize that, but I think when it comes times for budget, when it comes for time for budget cuts, that has been one of the results. I think the commissioners have generally worked extremely well together, and I've witnessed it for 34 years now. And seen it both in open sessions and closed session and everything else. And there hasn't been real partisan politics, if you will. But I think when it comes time for us in our budget, that has occurred.
But was a lot of this, the stuff that the auditor pointed out, was that a failure of the people to do their jobs, or was that a failure of a management tracking system that
both
that consistently would put into the proper format and the proper follow-up the need to take your high-value revenue leases and enforce the provisions of the lease? Like I said earlier, that's pretty basic stuff when you're a property manager.
Excellent questions, and I think what was pointed out by the auditor is that some of it had to do with the programming that went in, and one of our downfalls up until we realized this was going on is that when the Commission would take an action at a meeting, we have a meeting in 2 days, and when the Commission would take that action and authorize the lease, the process was you had to make sure that applicant had obtained insurance and posted their bond and did all this before we put it into the system. And sometimes that took weeks or months or something else. And so we had this backlog of where actually we'd signed leases, the other party signed leases, but they hadn't complied with all the provisions. And so the management protocol at that time was don't put it into the system yet because they haven't gotten insurance. We stopped that. And so now we've brought that up to date. You asked if there was some personal problems there, and we some of the most egregious leases that were identified by the controller were, frankly, ended up with just a couple of people involved in that area. That's not to excuse it, because obviously the management staff should be doing that. But with all the budget cuts going on during this period of time, everybody was triaging, and so people who were involved in those things, if there was a difficult issue involved in it, because maybe there was a title issue, in other words, do we really own it, or people were unresponsive time and time again. We've cut half our legal staff as well in the last 20 years. It was a matter of triaging, and some patients died, frankly. We're trying to, be Dr. Frankenstein a little bit here and bring those people back, bring those leases back into compliance, and I think we're making an outstanding effort in that regard and being successful for the most instances. But there'll always be problems. We look at what the banks are suffering through right now by not being able to collect on their loans and things like that. Certainly many of our leases have, lessees have difficulty in complying with all the terms of the lease. Should the state lease a piece of property if it doesn't get if the mom and pop in the Delta can't post an adequate bond? We've been fighting the last couple months on a particular lease where a bridge that went out to an island where all these people have their recreational facilities that collapsed, and we told them to shut it down until it could be made safe. The county involved says we don't have any standards for bridges in this area. The commission's barred from adopting standards for that type of use, so we just said make it safe and have an engineer certify that it's been constructed safe. We can't get them to get an engineer to do that. So
statewide standards for bridges?
For highway bridges. This is a bridge that is a small bridge. We're asking that it be brought up to highway standards. But, do you bring them into court? Do you evict the people? What do you do under those circumstances? There's a lot of complexity that get involved in these. One of the things I would like to add is that Senator Pavley carried a bill for us this year, SB 152, and the state auditor's reference to that we have 3,200 free leases. Over 1,000 of those will start paying rent beginning in January. The recreational peers, people who own waterfront property at places like Lake Tahoe or Huntington Beach or even here in the Delta area, will start paying rent for that as well. Many of those free leases that we mentioned, that she mentioned, though, are also to local governments and but primarily to other state agencies, state parks, Fish and Game, Caltrans, so forth. So we have with all the waterways that are crossed, we have a lot of leases. The Commission did direct us a few years ago to start charging for shoreline protection structures on the coast. So if you live at Malibu and have to put rock revetment out on the state property to protect your home, we didn't used to charge rent. We charge rent now. So we're trying to generate more funds in an equitable way for the state, and all our generation of funds go into the either STRS or general fund and their non-tax revenue. So,
but you're convinced you now have a tracking system that
it's improved, certainly. One of the things, listening to General Services, and this has been a struggle for us over the years, because periodically we'll get an announcement that we need to give a list of all our properties. Well, we could start with the Pacific Ocean. We don't have assessor's parcels or legal descriptions for the 4 million acres that we own.
Sure, I understand.
And so it's difficult to quantify
you have to
that.
track the mean high tide line, and
we have a staff of surveyors that are constantly working on that. We're working right now on the San Joaquin River Restoration Project, trying to help both Department of Water Resources and the Reclamation Bureau of Reclamation in reestablishing that, because
sure.
It's been dried out.
Yeah.
And so where is the boundary of state ownership in that area?
Commissioner Brewer?
I have a number of questions, and they're kind of all over the board. How hands-on are the commissioners? You say you have a meeting in 2 days. How often do you meet?
Well, in the past we used to meet once a month. In more recent years, it's been every other month. And this month, I think we have 50-some items on our agenda. A month or two ago, we had over 120, I believe. So it varies from time to time as to how many items they take up. The vast majority of our items are on the consent calendar, where unless a member of the public comes forward and asks to have it described, we have them taken up as one single item. But and I'd welcome you all to take a look at our website, and we think it's very informative and transparent as to the operations the Commission does. We've had posted on our website both the state auditor's report as well as our responses. The commissioners are very interested in it. This is as busy as they are with all the different boards and commissions they sit on. It's an area that they are very focused on, and I have to say, regardless of who they are or what office it's been, or what party they've been affiliated with, they've all been very dedicated and
what was
interested
their
in this
reaction to the auditor's report?
Well, they obviously, at the last commission, they directed the staff to come up with an audit action plan, and we will be presenting that on Thursday to them as to how we're responding. It parallels, for the most part, our responses to the auditor as their 60-day response, but they're separate documents, and again, that'll be posted on our website as well. They were concerned, as we were concerned. I mean, being the staff and dealing with these things on a daily basis, obviously, and having to prioritize and triage these issues, it's something it's a difficult struggle. When you can't keep up with your own workload, it takes a load on the individuals who are assigned to those things. So,
well, let's talk about staffing. I'm not sure that I understand. You have your oil spill prevention fund, which has 92.1 staffers. How is that determined? Is that mandated?
It goes through the budget process, the administration, and
no. Well, do you determine that? Do you present it to the administration?
Yes.
And why is there a need for 92 employees for oil prevention?
Well, a number of those personnel are inspectors that go out, as I said. They're on 24/7 rotation from Eureka to San Diego.
What number is that of the 92?
We have two branch offices. I don't know the exact number, but I can explain a little bit. We have an office in Long Beach that goes out into L.A. Long Beach. They'll also go down to San Diego that will inspect when tankers come in, either to unload or load hydrocarbons. Interestingly enough, California's economy is such now that we're starting to export almost more than we're importing. But we look at it both ways because we don't want to see spills in the harbor. I got an email last night or this morning that there is a sheen in Long Beach in the harbor, but I was told that it had nothing to do with our operations of the marine terminal. It was a different type of operation. We have another office in Hercules of inspectors who deal with the Northern California oil terminals, and there is 61 oil terminals in California that they are responsible for inspecting. But they not only inspect these people not only inspect them, but we have engineers who are designing. Part of the Lempert-Keene Sea Strand Act and its amendments have directed the Commission staff to develop standards to prevent oil spills. Our experts this summer went over to Japan to look at the impacts of the tsunami and earthquake on their marine oil terminals. They've been to Chile and other countries to look at that, and we think we've had some of the top engineers in the world looking at those issues to make sure those terminals are operated safe. And if one of them shuts down, that shuts down a refinery. When you go over to the gas station to pump gas, you're going to see a significant impact on your wallet and the rest of the Californians if we can't keep these terminals operating and functioning to keep California's energy.
So do you have one inspector in each region?
No, we have probably a dozen, I would guess, or so in each region that go out and do this activity. And, of course, they have backup engineers who are doing the design. We have a program called MOTEMS that deals with...
And so about how many engineers do you have?
In that particular program for the marine oil terminals, I believe we have... well, we made down to one. That's not right. I think it's probably a couple. Some of my staff probably knows more of this than I do. Five in that.
Okay.
We just lost our expert who retired, and that's, of course, one of the problems, too, is that we...
So that's about 30 positions. Where are the other 60?
We have a number of, the offshore platforms. So this was the marine oil terminals. We also have the islands, the 3 islands in Long Beach. We have an island in Ventura. We have 3 offshore oil platforms, one in Santa Barbara and a couple in Orange County. They're responsible for maintaining the safety of those and making sure that oil doesn't get spilled at those facilities. So they're on an ongoing auditing program for safety and oil spill prevention at that. They're just completing one at Platform Holly up in Santa Barbara County that they spent many months on to make sure that everything, all the operations there are done in a safe way. Those engineers, we have petroleum engineers, but we also have these safety engineers and structural engineers, so they go over this with a fine-tooth comb, and we've had an excellent record. Certainly the Commission was concerned after what happened in the Gulf of Mexico last year and directed us to have additional protections on the blowout preventers that failed in the Gulf of Mexico. So we were able to, because we couldn't immediately act to change our regulations in that regard, we actually negotiated with the oil companies, and they all agreed to comply with that. So we have third-party certification where it's not just the oil company and it's not just us,
So
but we have an
you
independent
see
certification as well.
your primary focus and your primary charge as to being the steward of the land holdings of California. Would that be
You
correct?
put that very well, thank you.
And so revenue collection is incidental?
No, revenue. I think they're competing, in many instances, competing forces. So, for example, a few years ago, the Commission was faced with a application for a lease to drill from a federal offshore platform back into Santa Barbara Channel that would have produced significant revenues for the state. But it was also something that would basically anything that's not under lease right now in California is in an offshore oil sanctuary set up by the legislature. There's two exceptions to that, and one exception is if there's drainage from another lease, such as a federal lease, offshore lease. There was evidence that there was some minor drainage from that lease that was operated by the federal government, and so it justified an application being considered by the Commission for that area. The Commission hasn't entered into a new offshore oil lease since 1968, a year before the oil spill in Santa Barbara that really started the environmental movement. So it's been the practice of the Commission, I guess you could say, to not approve any new offshore oil leases in a long time. It's also been more or less a for either party in California to go in there. There's not been a lot of support for that over the years, and so when the application by for this Plains...
Yeah, I understand the politics of a new lease in California, regardless who controls the state. I understand that, but you have been charged with a collection. You have a fiduciary responsibility to collect monies that are owed to California. And when the auditor's report came out, and this is my opinion, not the Commission's or anyone, you got a failing grade. And I can tell you personally the outrage that I heard from your constituency. And I hear you saying that, well, you're understaffed. But from a political position where my head goes, is you got three powerhouses as commissioners. You should be able to lobby on behalf of the good that you generate, the monies that you generate for the state of California. There's a disconnect there. I'm not getting it.
Well, this is a new year. 2011 is a new year,
Yeah.
and we are optimistic in this next budget cycle that the powers that be will be responsive to our requests.
But today you're dealing with what you're dealing with, and how do we address that? There are, to me, basic things that could be done. You say you could only have one appraiser for all this property. Oh, okay, fine. What about an outside contractor to do that? In the report, it says that it's too costly to litigate against people who are derelict and delinquent in their leases. Well, what about an outside collection agency? You don't have the money? Well, I know that there are agencies, there are companies that will do this. It will do it for a percentage of the money collected. I mean, there needs to be some outside-the-box thinking here, and I'm not hearing any of that.
Well, I think if you read our responses to the audit and to the action plan that we've developed, there is a lot of new ideas that we're exploring.
Okay, then, I'll take that at face value. This report was issued in August. What has happened in the 2 months since then? Name three positive things that have taken place, and you can say that it's working.
Okay, if you have a chance and attached to their report was our response, and I think it indicated that as far as early as November of 2010, that the Commission had taken significant responses to try and take action to improve its processes. And throughout all of this last year, we've done likewise. We have with the limited staff we've done a number of things. We fixed our what we call ALID program, which is the computer program.
Is that working now? Is it working better, or is it an inadequate system?
I'm told it is. It's a older system, but it's been tweaked, and we do have a programmer who's been working on it to try and make it address questions from the different divisions. One of the other criticisms, obviously, that the auditor said was that different divisions of the office were using their own programs because they didn't rely on it. Two answers to that. One is, I think that's very true because having come from the legal staff, we didn't spend time looking at that system because that's what our land agents were using as their thing. And so if we had assigned to us a trespass action or somebody who was in arrears and they wanted to take it to court, we would keep that on a separate roster where we were dealing with filing the litigation or talking to the Attorney General's office or building the case and so forth like that, which wouldn't fit into the general system that everybody looked at as to our leases. And I think the same is true. Our environmental section, who would look at CEQA documents and their tracking of that and how they had to do that. There's so many specialties that you wouldn't necessarily focus just on the lease database for purposes of what your division was working on. The surveyors who were dealing with boundary issues, many of these leases had no priority as far as a boundary issue, and so they would have a separate list that they would look at to deal with their issues as well. So I think there's still going to be that kind of focus by the experts in the area they're focusing on, but the database has been expanded in its use, so it will answer questions for each of those divisions if they have those questions, and so it's been improved significantly.
I would think that it would be a huge selling point when the time comes that if you were able to present that if you had 3 more staffers to do thus and so, that you would generate X number of dollars more for the general fund. I mean, that's an easy thing.
And we are identifying that for the administration for the next budget cycle. Let me say that one of the areas that where the really big dollars are, as Senator Rubio mentioned, was oil and gas. It trumps all the rest of the issues. I think they're all important, but as far as adding zeros, it's really in the oil and gas area.
I realize that, but the dire straits that this state is in, $1,000 here and there over 10 leases. Now you're at 10,000, and you can multiply that out. And I mean, and you saying that it's not cost effective to file suit against these people, but yet you've not looked at an outside source to do that.
Well, collecting rent from somebody isn't always that easy. Going through the Attorney General's offices, which is our typical route. We've had some people in the Delta, for example, who hadn't paid rent, and the Attorney General's office struggled to even serve them, find them, the owners of the property.
But there are professionals who do that. There are companies who do that.
There are. One of the things is the public policy against sharing Social Security numbers. The Commission doesn't have the authority, I'm told by our attorneys, to ask when an applicant submits their application to us that they provide their Social Security number for tracking purposes. We're looking at whether or not we should go to the legislature and ask for that authority, as obviously the Franchise Tax Board has and others.
A collection agency, a process server, they know how to do that without a Social Security number.
Our chief counsel actually ended up serving process in the case I was mentioning.
I'm telling you, there are ways to collect the money that are due the state. Would you talk about the fact that that we're losing money on our pipeline leases? That we charge 2 cents per lineal foot, and many other states charge a lot more money.
Yeah, actually that's the way you phrased it. It's not exactly correct because we don't charge 2 cents. We have not used that particular provision in our regulations for some time. So we look at an appraisal and the appraised value. We've compared that in the past to that regulation, and since we have alternative methods of charging rent, we look at the highest and best. for a rate of return, and so we've used appraisals in that instance. But we are looking at, based on the auditor's suggestion, that we look at other alternatives, and in fact, we provided them with a number of analysis that we had conducted with other states as to how they did it. We haven't reached a conclusion on what's the best. Seems like every state seems to do it a little bit differently. But regardless, that is something we will be looking at as an alternative, because there may be instances when that would be better than an appraisal. It is an antiquated provision in our regulations, and it needs to be either updated or removed.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the Commission? Thank you, Mr. Fossum. Appreciate you coming.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you for answering our questions.
Yeah. If you have any more, please contact us.
Thank you.
We appreciate that. Thank you. I have one request from a member of the public to speak, so I'd like to recognize Rebecca Desmond. Come forward and testify to the Commission. Limit your comments to 5 minutes, please. Welcome. Thank you for sitting through our hearing today.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to let you know I'm the director of the Division of Fairs and Expositions for the California Department of Food and Agriculture. And in response to some of your comments, Mr. Mitchell, and to just make a clarification from some of my friends at DGS on the utilization of fairgrounds. On their property inventory, you know, there are boxes that you check of fully utilized facility, partially utilized, and they're defined by fully utilized as 100% use of the facility by the state entity every business day. Now, at a fairgrounds, they would counter on one thing, that their business days are Monday through Sunday, and that they, while one building may be rented on a Saturday, it might not be used on a Monday kind of thing. So that, but they are used all the time. And a lot of times when buildings are not being used, it's a little bit of few days you have to get in there and paint and repair and do maintenance and things along that line. So we just wanted to make sure that you had the clarification that, you know, it's F&E's perspective that fairs are utilized, all the fairs in California, the DAAs and the county fairs are fully utilized, whether or not there's an actual activity going on, or if they're in standby mode for emergency services. A lot of our fairgrounds are used for evacuation centers and fire camps and things along that line, and they have to be always maintained and prepared to take on those types of activities. A lot of times at the little fair I used to manage up in Wairika, our barns and large buildings were full of RVs and boats all winter long because folks in McLeod and Mount Shasta can't park their RVs on the street because of the snow in the wintertime, so we served as a storage facility because we were the only buildings big enough in the county that could take those kinds of things. So I'm going to be coming back in January. Whitney and I have already had discussions about that to talk about fairs and things that, you know, more in depth with you all. But I just wanted to make that one clarification with you this afternoon.
When you come back, I understand your point about they're fully utilized, but it would be great if we could get information about what the total cost of the fairgrounds are to the general fund, because even when they're being painted or repaired, there's a cost because of the personnel that are doing that, and ultimately not every fairground is recovering enough revenue to cover the cost to the general fund, I would assume.
That's correct, but the way the funding works, the fairs raise their own revenues, and then the $32 million that was in the general fund was all of the state supplement they got. Now they get none. So the cost is to the District Ag Association itself. Overall expenditures for the whole network of 78 fairs is in the realm of about $250 million, but that includes all fairs. I don't have the breakdowns for just the District Ag Association.
Well, I don't know that this is still current, but a few years ago I understood that there were only 2 fairs or fair boards in California that were self-supporting, that the rest, the other 76, were subsidized by the state.
It probably depends on your definition. You know, the Orange County Fair and the San Diego County Fair, which are district ag associations, they don't receive any state allocation from F&E because of their their large revenues, but they participate in other programs such as unemployment reimbursement. We used to have a $950,000 line item out of the $32 million that fairs could apply for reimbursement of their unemployment claims. And Los Angeles County Fair, a very successful nonprofit fair, they would get upwards of $200,000 in unemployment claims, reimbursed.
Now,
so
all that money has gone away?
all that money is
And
gone.
they're on their own?
They're all on their own currently.
As of January 1.
As of January 1, 2011, yeah.
Well,
Sorry, July 1. July 1.
The only thing I ask is if we can get a breakdown before January of each fairground, because
Sure.
I think that's the question. Is some of them may be self-sufficient, but some of them, it'd be good to see it. Look ahead when you cut that $32 million piggy bank off. Which ones are really, really going to struggle and be a problem? Because ultimately, if they can't make it, the state, I assume, has to reassume control.
Yeah, that's what we're looking at through the consortium process and things like that. So
Thank you.
we will get back to you on that.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. No other requests, so I'll adjourn the public hearing for today. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes at room 340, the Library and Courts building. It's a little tricky to get up there, so I assume somebody will, or we'll have somebody getting you up the elevator.
What about the majority of the fairs?